welcome to Submission Tetris, tips and tricks for managing your submissions and selling your writing. I'm Jennifer Hudak. I am the moderator. I am a short fiction writer almost exclusively. And I've been writing and publishing. I started out in literary fiction, which is a very different beast. But I've been writing and publishing in science fiction and fantasy since 2017. And so I'm just going to ask the panel if you guys would all, oh, and my pronouns are she, her. If you could introduce yourself with your pronouns and tell us a little bit about you. So you're next to me on my screen, if you wouldn't mind going first.
So I'm also she, her. I'm I Jang. I also started in literary fiction, actually. I started writing short stories and submitting in late 2020. I mostly write speculative fiction now. Um, I have a debut novella out called Linghun and a mini collection called Small Tales. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Patty, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm P.A. Cornell. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Chilean Canadian writer. I also didn't start with fiction. I started with nonfiction, so that's a little bit different, but I've been publishing fiction since 2015 now. I mostly write science fiction, but also fantasy and horror. And I mostly write short fiction, but I put out my debut novella last year. It's called Lost Cargo, so that was a little bit longer, and I'm currently working on a novel, so we'll see how that goes.
All right, thank you. And now LS.
So I'm LS Johnson. I'm also she, her. I write weird fiction and dark fantasy. And actually, like other people on this panel, I came from a more literary background. And I actually, from 20 odd years ago, I have an MFA in creative nonfiction. And you can see what I'm doing with that now. And then I came back to speculative fiction around 2010, 2011 or so, and started publishing a couple of years later. Relevant to this panel, I've published about 40 short stories in everything from pro-rate to for the love markets. I have also self-published 2 collections. The first one won the North Street Book Prize and was a finalist for World Fantasy. And the second one won an Ippy Medal in Horror and was on the preliminary ballot of the Stoker. And I also just want to say I tend to write long. I also have self-published novellas, and the novelette is my sweet spot. So
Wonderful. Okay, so the way that I think we'll run this is I'm hoping to have 30 or so minutes of discussion. And then if anyone who's watching this wants to drop questions in the chat, we can maybe try to get to those questions at the end of our discussion. So I wanted to start off just this is just a very kind of basic question, but I think it's a really important one, is just how do you keep track, especially for people who write a lot? Like I know some of us write a lot. And so how do you keep track of your submissions? And you guys can jump in if you want to. We don't have to go in turn, but I can call on people if you'd rather.
I use the grinder now. I did Duotrope when it was free, and then it became paid, and I was like, oh, let's find something else. And one of the nice things about the grinder is that I used to forget every now and then, like if something was gone for months, it's like it would just sort of disappear from my brain. So it reminds me of that. The grinder also lets you report money. And so I also plug in my self-publish, money at the end of the year, and then I can kind of see an overall picture of kind of how I'm doing, good, bad, or ugly at the end of it. But it's been really useful.
Do you two also use the grinder, or do you use something else?
I do. I'd say the grinder is probably my primary tool. But I also, in addition to that, usually have like an Excel sheet or something where I'll keep track of what I'm currently have out on submission and how it's doing and whatever. So both those things.
So at first I had a spreadsheet when I first started submitting, and I didn't anticipate how much I was gonna submit. So I made the mistake of not putting down the year of when I had sent it and only the day. And, and yeah, I'm still suffering for the consequences till this day. But anyways, like I would put down when I had a spreadsheet, I would put down when I sent it, when I received the response, whether it was like a personal or form rejection, and whether or not it was held or passed on to multiple rounds, just so I can see like which markets are more receptive to my type of work, or at least to like a certain type of story, so I can target the same type of story or the same um, markets again who did like my work. And then after, when I moved into speculative fiction, I started using the submission grinder. By that point, it's too late to not use both because I was so deep in the trenches with my spreadsheet. And there was just no way I was going to import all that information onto the grinder. So now I have both. I would kind of like mark it down in both. And sometimes I would miss something in my spreadsheet that the grinder would catch. But I would also have like a separate spreadsheet to track how much I make from writing, which I didn't realize the grinder had before. So that's why I have the separate one. But it's nice to just see like the breakdown of like how much I made on a separate thing too. So
Yeah, I hear you with the being in too deep with the spreadsheet too. I'm the same way. I definitely started with a spreadsheet before I moved to the submission grinder. But I think for me, they serve different purposes because the spreadsheet, I have it by story. I have one sheet for things that are out on submission for originals and another sheet for reprints. And I color code them because I'm that nerd. So I color code them as like if it's out on submission, it's one color. If it's a form rejection, it's another color. If it's a personal rejection, it's another color. Yeah. And so, and I just wanted to ask, have you guys answer this quick. The grinder, someone asked if the grinder keeps your data for a long time. Yes. Yes, you don't have to download it. It's there. I mean, you can export it, but it'll be there for you. Yeah. So, how then? So the other thing I was going to say about my spreadsheet is that I keep track of markets that I have in mind for a particular story, so that when I get a rejection back, I can look at my own spreadsheet and be like, oh, right, I want to send it to that one next. So, but because markets are sometimes closed or sometimes have very short submission windows, how do you all prioritize what markets to submit to? Like what moves something kind of higher or lower on your own personal submission list? Patty, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. There are so many. I could talk all day about that, but I mean, really, like it's tough to say like which one is the top thing for me. Like for instance, like yeah, there's pay, for example. So professional pay versus, a token payment or something might put something higher or lower on the list, but it's not the end all and be all. For instance, if there's like a charity anthology that I want to participate in and there's no pay for that, there's pay in knowing that it's going to a good cause. And so it's a different kind of thing. So that would put something up a little higher for me, even though it's not, money in the bank. Then things like, the prestige of the market, or if it's just like a quality publication that you just really want to be a part of, or if the theme is something that just really speaks to you. What else? If you already have like a rapport with the editors, for instance, you've sold to them before, or you just know of them and just know what they stand for and you like them. So these are all things that would bump a market up a bit more for me. So I'm sure there's still more. I'll let you guys cover the rest.
LS or I, do you have any other thoughts to add?
Do you want to
yeah,
go
so
ahead?
my process, oh,
No, go.
So my process has really changed since I first start submitting. So I'll talk about like the different processes I went through at each stage in case people might want to like adopt it given like whatever their like works for them. So at the beginning, I prioritized like the fastest responding markets and didn't really have tiers on where I would send work out because at that point I was just trying to get work out and trying to get my work seen and published as many places as possible. And I knew at that point my work wasn't at like competing quality with people submitting to and getting into pro markets, right? So I wasn't really too big about like, oh, I have to get into a specific pro market. It was just I will get work out first, get some editor eyes on it, and then just keep working at my craft. But then afterwards, I changed it to kind of a tiered method, but then I would still go for fastest responding markets. So if there were like specific pro or semi-pro markets that responded faster than others, I would go to those first before moving on to other ones. But like Patty was saying, how like sometimes it would just be I like this market, even if this piece could get into a better market or something, I'll like submit to another market just because I like what they're doing, or I like the editor and like I like the people who have been published in the market.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
it's all very, all very similar. I do think about pay. I think about turnaround times. I think about how the market presents the work and how do they promote the work. Do they get eyes on it? Do they get on year's bests and recommended lists and award attention and things like that? Is it readable? Is it accessible? Is it, are people going to be able to get to it? I had a story once that I sold for a lovely $500 and I went to promote it and there was no way to buy the issue online and I kind of lost my mind. So they've since put up a PDF, but it wasn't a great promo thing. Um, and especially because I write very slowly. I have maybe 2 or 3 stories available at any one time. That's a good thing for me. And my stories are very long, so it's a limited market thing. So promotion is in some ways almost as important as pay for me. Like how much can I get the story to work, in terms of getting attention to my whole body of work.
Do you guys so there's a difference between markets that are in thinking about reader eyes.
Mhm.
Some of the very prestigious markets are paper only, and then you have markets that are online but are paywalled versus online and free. Um, does that factor into your Tetris, or how does that factor into your Tetris?
I think for me, if I think I'm going to get more eyes on a story, that's probably more important than almost anything. So, but that's kind of a lesson I've learned the hard way because a lot of my stories are not that accessible. So now it's become like, much more of a priority.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite, it's not like a no paywall or no paper kind of thing. Um, but I do, if I'm getting that kind of granular about it, which is, again, when you write longer, the list of markets is small. So there's not, you don't have a huge amount of choice. But on the rare times that I do write a 5,000 word story and it's like, oh my God, there's so many, there's so many places to send it to. I do think about that. And I think about it also as like, is there potential reprint markets for this? So if I put it in a paper one, is it like a good candidate for a podcast or something later on? Can it get a second life? So I might weigh those two things out as I'm thinking where to send it. So I don't eliminate paywalls or paper only, but I do think a little bit about, will I be able to get more eyes on it later on if I put it here first?
That does bring up the question of reprints, which I definitely want to get to in a second. But you go first.
Yeah, so I also think about the the reprint possibilities after I send a work, because there are a lot of prestigious markets that are paper only, right? That will get a lot of eyes regardless of the fact that they don't do online. So I would still kind of like go for those markets just for the prestige, and then reprint in more accessible places because reprints are kind of unlimited. You can just keep reprinting your work if you want more eyes on it, right? So, but then I think that brings up the question of award eligibility and how widespread you want it to be read, because if it's print only and people are not subscribed to it, then it's a little harder to access, right? Compared to if they are print and online. But then that also like surprised me because of my story that was a Nebula finalist was in a print only magazine. So you just like never know how people will like how accessible print only is and stuff like that, right? So
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
they have a wide circulation anyway, or they're read by reviewers a lot. So that can make a difference.
The prestige factor,
Right.
right? For sure. Um, so this someone in the chat had asked something that touches on a question I had. They were asking about keeping track of windows, open windows, and that's a question that I have too. So when you have both markets that only have limited submission windows and possibly themed limited submission windows, plus anthologies, which always would have, limited time submission windows, do you tend to hold on to pieces for specific markets that are opening sometime in the future? Or do you try to get in and out with a quick rejection before you send it to those places? And do you write stories specifically for markets and for calls, or do you just try to slot in stories that you already have to kind of fit in where they go?
Calls.
LS, do you want to go?
I feel like they're great prompts. If I see a call that I like, I will write for it. I almost never have anything that randomly fits a call. It just that kind of lineup never happens for me. Um, and holding it or not holding it, it kind of depends. It depends on how far out that window is. It depends on what are the other markets that I thought of for that. I do have a year calendar on my wall. That's just like a big paper, sheet, and I do put on it like the light speed window in May is on there right now. So I have that in the back of my head as I'm pushing things around, I do have one story that might work for that. So I'm trying to time it, keep it out of the loop right now so that it can hit that window. And there's an anthology call in August that I might write too. So again, that's just on the big calendar in the back of my head. If something sparks, I have that August window to shoot for. But yeah, I think it's a different touches if you have like 10 or 15 stories that you're playing with at all times, then you have a lot more flexibility and can really move things around.
You have more flexibility, but it also is sometimes there's just not enough open. So you have these stories that are good stories, and you have pieces already, the other places that are open. Um, I know you probably have experience with this from the volume that you write. But how do you handle kind of the windows and all of that stuff?
um so at one point I had about 25 or so stories in circulation, and that was an absolute wild mess, I will tell you that much. But they were all at some place, somewhere, at some time, at some point, usually at like 3 or 4 markets for some of them. And if it's a story that I've been trying to shop for a while, they might be up to like at 8 markets, just because I'm just trying to get it out and then to make room for new stories to send. But I completely lost track of what I was going to say. Could you repeat the question?
But I was just asking, like, so how do you handle keeping track of things for various submission windows,
Right.
both in terms of just kind of holding on to things versus not holding on to things, but also when you have a lot of submissions, how do you? I mean, it seems like there's two different strategies you might use for handling those windows. One when you have just a few stories to submit, and one when you have a ton of stories to submit. I think your strategy is probably going to be different.
So before I would mark down all of like the open windows, and then I would set an alarm to get in right when the clock strikes 12. So in case they reject the first story, I'll have the backup story to go in right away. And if they reject that one, I'll have the backup story go in right away. Just so I can get as many submissions in within that window in case the first one doesn't work out. Um, but yeah, so that is kind of like my strategy for the different windows and different pieces. So I'll have kind of like a list of markets in a doc, and the stories I think would fit for those markets just like lined up already. And then I would double check with my spreadsheet afterwards to see if I had already sent it to that market even after I like take it out of the document and things like that before I send it. But yeah, but it meant like some weird 5 a.m. wake ups just to quickly send a thing before I go back to sleep.
I've been there.
Yep.
What about you, PA?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like I like jotting things down in multiple places because I don't always trust technology. So I do have the paper calendar that I'll write um upcoming windows in, especially if it's something I'm really excited about and I really don't want to miss. It goes on there. Um, I also I'll have like an Excel spreadsheet for each story where I will say where I'm submitting it or whatever. And there I'll also mark if I'm saving it, for instance, for a particular window so I don't accidentally submit it somewhere else. But I have at times said like, oh, Asimov's is pretty quick. I can just send it there, get a quick rejection and like see what happens. So sometimes I'll do that. But if it's something I'm like, I must get into this anthology or whatever, I'll definitely hold it. And I've done the wake up in the wee hours or stay up late, depending to do that. I tend to, when I'm gonna do that, I'll have my files like ready to go. Like I'll look at all their submission guidelines and make sure everything is perfect. So all I have to do is basically just send. So if I'm half asleep, there's less chance of me messing that up. And I do occasionally write for a theme. It hasn't really been like super successful for me because I feel like when I'm kind of trying to constrain my stories, I end up with something kind of okay most of the time. But I still try. Like you were saying, it is like a good prompt. And sometimes even if like the first version of your story isn't great, sometimes you can rewrite it and it's like, okay, now it's good, or whatever. But it does kind of encourage you to keep writing.
And then another kind of submission Tetris themed issue with anthologies is when there's a very prestigious anthology with a very specific theme. The question then becomes, after you get a rejection from that anthology, do you join the flood of other themed submissions kind of flooding the market, or do you wait a month or two and hold on to it? Hopefully some of those stories have already kind of gotten picked up somewhere and yours stands out a little bit more. Or do you even think about that at all?
I think about it a little. It doesn't stress me out too much. I have been in the situation with like my first pro publication was for a punk rock future. So it was a pretty specific narrow theme. And I remember thinking like, please don't reject my story because I don't know what I'm going to do with it if you do. So luckily they took it. Um, but Yeah, like I will consider should I send it? Sometimes if I know it's kind of a slower market and they're not going to get to it for a long time, I might just submit it right away because I'm like by the time it gets to them maybe like it'll kind of be well past the theme. And it also depends how rigidly I adhered to that theme. So, but I tend to, if something is super, super, super specific, unless I'm in love with that theme, I probably won't even write to it because of that, because it just limits what you can do with it afterwards.
Yeah, I tried drafting a story for there was a Shakespeare call last year, and I tried drafting a story for that, and then like my life went into chaos mode, and I never got it finished. And I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with that thing now. I'm kind of torn between kind of leaving it as it is, and maybe it goes in the collection down the line, or trying to file the Shakespeare serial numbers off and kind of push it more into secondary world fantasy. But right now it's just sitting there, and it's so specific. I mean, I can't even imagine there was like a flood of Shakespeare stories afterwards, because who it's such a narrow theme. And I don't usually do those, but I do love Shakespeare. So but yeah, it's just sitting on the hard drive right now, which I try not to do. I always try to have everything out working, trying for something. But that one I was just like, I don't even know where to begin with a submission for this.
So that actually does bring up another. There's so many really good questions in the chat that I've been looking at. So I want to kind of just get to some of those questions right now, if that's okay with you all. And that gets to a question that someone asked. LS, you said you want to have all your stories out there working, and someone asked, when do you give up on a story? So how many submissions do you send something out before you decide that's it, forget it, I'm not sending it out anymore? Or as a corollary, do you tinker with stories when you get rejections? Like, you know what I mean? Just to kind of constantly try to rework it. Those are really kind of two questions, but I think they're two sides of the same coin. So, why don't you go first this time?
So I have had a story that received 89 rejections before it was picked up.
Yeah.
And by the time it got picked up, it saw about 7 different versions of it. But it was like very minor tweaks each time, wasn't like, massive overhauling revisions. But that was also the story I had written for like when I first started submitting. So that could be one of the reasons why it took so long. But a lot of my stories actually see like 20 plus rejections before they land. And it's funny because sometimes like even after 20 plus rejections, it might land in a pro market. You just never know where it might land, depending on where I send it first too, right? Because sometimes if all the pro markets are blocked up by the other pieces, I might go to the semi-pro or below markets with that story first before going back to the pro market.
Mhm.
So like market aesthetics, you just never know. So don't self-reject, friends. But I think out of the stories I've written, maybe only like 5 out of 100 or so I had actually retired. All the other ones I just like try to spam it everywhere. Um, but for the 5 that I did retire, they were very much written for like prompt things that I wasn't very passionate about. And usually those are like what gets retired. If there's a story that I wrote because I really like the idea, I'll probably just keep trying to get it out there because you never know who might like it.
Do either of the other of you have different philosophies about that?
Pretty much the same for me. Like I kind of keep sending them out, I mean, until they sell. And I think probably I'm at like 26 or 27 is my max of rejections before a sale so far. So I don't think that's too bad. It's not too long to wait. So but yeah, like I think if I do give up on a story, it's not because like, oh, it didn't sell, nobody likes it. It's more like I no longer like it. Like I no longer want to put my name to this story for whatever reason. Maybe I now read it and I think, oh, it sounds a little problematic or it's outdated. Or like you said, I wrote it for a call and it's like, I wasn't really passionate about it ever. So it's got to be something like that. And there haven't been many that I've retired because of that. Like as long as I'm still kind of okay with putting my name to it, it keeps going out there.
That's a really good point too, that the longer you're writing and submitting, the more you change as a writer. So what I always feel is if I would still be proud to have people read it with my name attached to it. I'm going to keep on sending it out.
Well, as for just working on it as I go, I don't tend to fix stuff like just with every rejection. I think you'll just drive yourself crazy doing that. If an editor happens to put in like a personal rejection, like, oh, I rejected it for this reason, and I agree with that, I might do that. Sometimes I'll disagree and I'll be like, well, I guess it just wasn't for you, but and I move on. But for the most part, I leave them essentially untouched during the submission process. I will, like, if it's been a while and I like no longer really remember the story that well, I might reread it and then I might tweak it a bit, because by then, like you said, you've grown as a writer. You might do things a little bit better. So I've done that, but I'm not sitting there like I'm more sending it out as quickly as I possibly can. Like I'll get a rejection and immediately send it out again most of the time. So unless I think it's worth giving it another look.
What about you, LS?
Yeah, generally, yes, I want them all to be out there hustling, you know. And I always have several markets lined up for it. What I'm finding though is that the longer I go as a writer, the longer the stories are getting. And right now, for instance, I have a story that is 17,800 words. And that is because I have pared it down as much as possible. And the number of markets for 17,800 words are very, very few. And so for the first time in 10 years, I am coming up on a point when there is absolutely no market left for this. And it has not been rejected that many times. It's just like there's just so few to begin with because it's too short for novellas, right? Most novellas start at 20,000 and I query and they're like, nope, nope, 20,000 because we need to put a spine on the book. And then, the number of short fiction markets that will go that long are really few. So I am actually thinking of self-publishing it standalone. Um, but I think that's something to remember is that, even if the story kind of hits the end of its road, at least in the, I mean, besides the fact that there's always anthologies coming up and there's always special issues coming up and there's always different things, is that that's short, a market is not the only end game for a short story. There are other things you can do with it as well. So
That's an excellent point. It's never kind of the end. As long as you still believe in a story, you can figure out a way to get it out there for sure. And just kind of following up on something PA said, that when you get a response, even a personal rejection, I sometimes think of those, again, unless it's something I totally am like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? It's often more a clue of how to get another story published in this market, as opposed to what is wrong with the story you sent. So in other words, like this, you have more insight on that editor now. Like, oh, this editor would prefer stories that X. Rather than, oh no, all my stories have to do this right now. Because there's editors are so different. There's editorial taste is so varied. And with that in mind, someone asked in the chat, I've seen and agree that you need to read or at least be aware of the markets you sub to, but there are so many markets. How do you triage? Which markets or types of markets do you keep track of? And then as a corollary to that, how do you keep track of all of the details like sub windows and pay and all that stuff?
Guess I'll jump in first. Oh. Um, in terms of like sub windows and pay, I would say yeah, the submission grinder very good at that because they have the filters that you can put in. So let's say you only want to be paid 5 cents and above or something like that. You can put that in and it like narrows down the markets for you and according to genres too. Forgot the beginning of the question again. I'm
Do
so
you keep
sorry.
track? How do you decide which markets to like read and really follow and keep
Right.
track of before you submit?
So sometimes I'll look at writers that I really love the writing of and see where they are submitting and where they are publishing, or like writers with similar tone or styles to what I have when I'm writing. But then sometimes it just comes with like the volume of submissions I do, and you kind of just gradually come to understand which markets like what when you get personals from them or when you get forms from them, and then you kind of keep in mind which stories did they seem more receptive to compared to others.
So it's not necessarily reading 5 issues of a magazine before you submit, but almost like letting letting the results of your submission do some of the work for you.
Yeah, because I feel like there are some writers, they say that they've read, like 5 issues of a magazine and they still can't figure out how to get into that magazine. So it might not always tell you what you need to know to get in.
Ellis or Patty?
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I feel like, I mean, it's impossible to read them all. Like, especially if you're submitting a ton, like we do, we submit a lot. But uh, you know, you kind of get an idea. I think in terms of reading, I read the things that I enjoy as a reader. So like there's certain markets that I know they consistently publish the kinds of things that I enjoy reading. So I'll just read those for fun. I'm not really consciously saying like, oh, I'm going to read this so that I know exactly what to send them, because again, I'm a big don't self-reject person, and I've often sold stories to markets that I thought they didn't have a chance at, and then they take it, and I'm like, are you crazy? But okay, because you don't know. So even if you do read extensively, you could be totally wrong, or the editor might be looking for something different than what they've published before. So it's kind of a tough call. Like, yeah, you do want to have a general idea of what they publish. You don't want to send fantasy to somebody who only publishes like horror, unless it's dark fantasy. But you know, yeah, I mean, you can only know so much, and it's like you kind of keep it in your head, like the kind of things that you think they might like, and you probably send those first. But yeah, I mean, and then when you're done those, send the ones you don't think have a chance at all. They'll probably take those. In my experience, that's how it works.
Yeah, I always start each submission thing with like a whole new search on the grinder, because I feel like it reminds me what's out there. It reminds I can see what's open, because I usually search for things that are also temporarily closed, so I can kind of see, all right, there's that market, but they're not, we can start to do that. And you do get a feel over the years, you read other people's stories, you start to develop like an idea of, what Strange Horizons likes to publish, or what, like, and so on. Um, I do always at least eyeball the websites, just kind of thinking, could I see myself in here? Do I see myself kind of in this mix? And sometimes I will still kind of submit anyway, but I do try to kind of gravitate first towards the ones that are like, oh, I could see my story falling in among these, And it's not like reading the entire issue necessarily, unless I get sucked in, but it's at least kind of skimming and kind of getting a feel and seeing if I recognize author names and so on. And again, like if I do dark fantasy, if I go to a place and it's all roses and butterflies and happily ever after everything, I'm like, maybe not. Maybe not.
And I just wanted to put in one little plug here for reading not just the magazines that you hope to be published in, because there are definitely magazines and anthologies, etc., for particular demographics that you might not belong to, and therefore should not submit to. But it's really an enriching experience to read outside your own comfort zone, and to not just read the things that, so, I'm going to submit most likely to magazines that I enjoy reading, but I also want to challenge my own sense of what I like reading. And so I just want to put a plug for reading outside of the venues that you personally can submit in, so that you can, just broaden your horizons of what fiction can be. I just want to make sure that we're not just looking at reading in a kind of like, where can I publish way.
Completely agree.
There's a question here, which I actually wanted to ask too, about simultaneous submissions. So more simultaneous submissions they're kind of accepted in the literary among literary magazines on the literary side, and they also have those magazines often tend to have very long response times, very long, some of them. More magazines now in the science fiction and fantasy side of things are accepting simultaneous submissions. Still not many, but more of them are. And so the question is, do you avoid simultaneous submissions considering how long response times are at some markets? I know also some people avoid simultaneous submissions just because it seems to like it's just scary or just confusing having it out multiple times. But what do you all think about simultaneous submissions?
I think they're okay, but like people seem to think that that's it. That's going to save everything. It's going to make it so much easier if I can just send them all out to everywhere at once. But it's not quite as simple as it seems. Depending on what you prioritize, it can sometimes be a double-edged sword. So I do like having that option sometimes, but I tend to also consider, where I would, for instance, like to be published more. For instance, if my dream market is open and they take sim subs, and some other market that I don't care as much about also does at the same time, am I going to be just as happy to get an acceptance from them if I haven't heard back from the dream market? So if the answer, like if they're not basically equal in my eyes, then I'm probably not going to submit it at the same time to both of them. So that is something to consider, but it's nice to have, like if you can, but I probably don't do it as much as you might think.
I do it a lot, a whole ton, as I'm sure almost everyone knows or can figure it out by my submission stats. But I do tend to stagger them in the sense that if I do have it at a dream market and it takes like a really, really long time to hear back, I might send it right when the dream market window opens. And if there's another market that like I would also want to submit to, I might submit it at the very end of their window. So then I might be able to hear back from the dream market before I hear back from the other market. But like Jennifer had said, like with literary markets, it's definitely a lot easier to do simultaneous submissions. So when I was submitting to those, I sometimes sent upward to like 15, like have the same story at 15 of those markets at once. But yeah, but it also depends on how quickly they respond, right? If they respond really quickly and it's no simultaneous submissions, I would like not time sub. But if it takes a long time, I don't know. I might time sub. Yeah.
And it is a good point, just before we get to you, LS, that when you do simultaneously submit, the first place that you get an acceptance from is where you go. It's not like when you're querying a novel where then you can go back and be like, hey, I've got this offer. It's like if you're, if your dream market is still holding on to a story and you get an acceptance from somewhere else, then you have to go with the place that accepted you. So yeah, those calculations do matter. But LS, what are your thoughts on sim subs?
Yeah, I tend to think of sim subbing as kind of a second tier sort of thing. Like I usually have a couple of places where I really want that story to be, and I take the time to let it go through there normally. And then as we kind of get through those top choices where I'd really want it, then I can start. I do also write like a fair number of things that kind of are borderline lit spec. And once we move into like literary submissions, then yes, it's like here are 8 markets because I know you're not going to get back to me for 7 or 8 months. And so we just send it all out at once. I think it's 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 generally helpful. If you need to take longer, but I would rather just that the market kind of focus on getting through that first tier of rejections more, put their energy into there rather than kind of opening the floodgates like that. Yeah, I'm a very impatient person. I have a really, really hard time with long wait times. So I'd rather just know quickly and move on with my life.
Yeah, and I feel like wait times have definitely been getting longer across the board, which
Yeah.
does make it tough.
Mhm.
Um, one more question here, which my final question that I was going to ask was going to be on coping with the stress of submission Tetris, and someone did ask in the chat that submission Tetris often feels like a second full-time job. So this person asks, how much time do you devote to Tetris per day, per week? But I also wanted to ask, on top of that, um, do you separate out your Tetris from your writing life, or is it in terms of like, this is a stressful kind of business side and I have to kind of keep it distinct to like 1 day a week, or 1 hour a day or whatever, or is it not super stressful for you and you can kind of bop in and out of it all the time? Ellis, why don't you go first this time?
It's definitely a different hat, right? You have the creative hat when you're trying to make this beautiful story and you're trying to make it as awesome as it can be, right? And then I have to take the creative hat off and put the business hat on and say, okay, now we're gonna put this out there. It's not that stressful for me because I don't ever have that much out at one time. So trying to manage it is not that much work. But I feel like planning helps me, like knowing that I'm not going to miss a great window because I've really thought through the next few months and where it can go. That helps. Having another story to work on helps to keep me from clicking refresh and getting weirded out when other people on Twitter are getting responses and I'm not. Um, and always just having another place for it to go to, right? So the rejection comes in, and before it's even really had a chance to sting, we're right back out the door at another perfectly good market that would be great to land in. Um, but yeah, I think also just not, I don't know how you would do 20 plus stories at one time. That would make me crazy. The three is enough. The three is enough, trying to keep track of them.
I
How do you
almost,
do? Oh, no, go ahead, PA.
I was gonna say, I almost feel like having more stories out there makes it easier for me. Like I'll routinely have like 30 stories out, and it's like, then I'm not worried about, is that one story gonna sell? Unless maybe it's like my favorite story I ever wrote. I might fixate a bit more on that one. But yeah, in general, it's like there's so many out there that I'm not stressing about it. Most of the time, I don't really think about it that much. So I don't know that I can quantify and say, I spend X number of hours doing submission Tetris. But I feel like early in the month, because a lot of, or I guess early and late in the month, a lot of markets will open like at the beginning of the month or something. So I'll like kind of do a lot then, every once in a while, like if like I don't write every day. So sometimes when I'm not writing, I will do like just kind of like, oh, let me just take a look at what, upcoming submissions I might be able to do and whatever. So I'll do that. And like I said, when I get a rejection, I send it out as quickly as possible. So I usually have markets lined up to go to next if I need to. So it is a lot of like planning. Um, what else? I lost my train of thought. But yeah, like I'm not constantly checking the grinder or anything like that. That'll just drive you crazy. Please don't do that, people. Like, I know it's tempting, but don't. Maybe once a day at most, but don't be constantly refreshing.
I definitely check the grinder more than once a day.
Don't do it.
No, don't be me. Don't be me. Yes. What about you?
Um, so at first I had the strategy of like, because I sent to a lot of fast responding markets, as soon as they come in, they would go back out. If I wasn't like at the computer and I see the email, I would like right when I get home, I would like send it out before doing anything else. But then as like the volume stories became higher and the volume of rejections became higher, because there were some days where I would get like 5 rejections at once. It would be like, wake up in the morning, oh, good wake up call. And then at lunch, oh, thank you for my after lunch snack. And then at dinner, and then right before I sleep, I'm like, yeah, great way to end the day. All right, let me just get up and send it back out before I go to sleep. Um, but then I started doing them more in bulk. So then I would just pick one day of the week, send 10 submissions out, and then leave it at that. But then I'm a very impulsive person. So sometimes when I see the rejection, I'll still go back and like send them out. But then that's how I like end up racking up a lot of submissions sent, right? And because I think in like last year I sent about 400 to 600. I can't remember. But so it was, yeah, just bulk sending them really helped.
We are at 10 minutes before the hour, amazingly. This has been just an incredible discussion. I just wanted to give everyone just like 10 seconds or so each, if you could just remind everyone who you are and where they can find you outside of the con. So LS, why don't you go first?
I'm LS Johnson. I write weird fiction and dark fantasy, and my website is traversingz.com.
And if you wanted to go to the toast room afterwards, maybe you could put your link there.
Yep.
PA, how about you?
I'm PA Cornell. My website is pacornell.com. That probably tells you everything you'll need to know about my writing and me there. But I'm also at Cornell Writer on pretty much all my social media. So that's like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram for the most part. So yeah, see you there.
Perfect. And I, how about you?
I am Jang. I write a whole ton of things. Whatever you think I can write, I will probably write it. You can find me at ijang.ca and on Twitter at ijang_, and other social media things you can find there too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Oh, and again, I'm Jennifer Hudak. My website is jenniferhudackwrites.com, and I am on Twitter at HudakWrites. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank all of you for the conversation. This was really, really great. I loved hearing all of your different approaches.